There are certain moments in life where you look back at them, you wish to yourself that the current you could act upon that particular situation and that would have somehow changed the course of that entire event, which in turn affected how your life looks like right now at the moment. With the current wisdom that I've sort of like gained over life, which by the way means absolutely nothing. Even myself, I'll watch this video while I'm editing maybe in the future and I'll think to myself like, what the heck was I even speaking back then? But speaking of wisdom, it doesn't necessarily imply that I somehow, let's say, got smarter. It just means the fact that I have lost more things in life. I have lost more games in life. When I look back at my life, there's some things, there's some experiences that I can act upon now. There's a plethora of lessons to learn from. So this month, I'll be turning 20. So that would mean that I'm not a teenager anymore. I am going into my 20s. So with that being said, in this particular video, I'll be talking about how I sort of like ruined my teenage life, kind of like the mistakes I made back when I was a teenager. I mean, I still am to a fair degree. I mean, it's just a matter of days. How I kind of like made those mistakes and how I'm willing to improve myself so that I do not repeat the same thing in my 20s. So sort of like the central idea around which this particular video will revolve around goes something like this. With my desire to perfect every experience, I ruin every moment. This was one of the common problems actually back in the day. I remember it all through. I just wanted to kind of like be that person who was a perfectionist, who sticks to his rules, his principles. And that might seem fine, but that was like one of my biggest weaknesses as a kid. So sort of like the thing that happened over time as a result of that was I didn't really do anything exceptional except studying all through my teenage life, like almost all through my teenage life. I left my friends like 4 times, so I never had that level of bonding, that level of friendship that people have all these years. I never did all of the cool things that sort of like quote unquote the cool kids do, like going to parties, drinking, all that kind of stuff. I never did any of those things, to be honest. I never really participated in sort of like a serious relationship of sorts. I used to love sports as a kid, but I left that. I mean, it kind of sucks to be thinking about that again. For the past couple of years, I haven't really even traveled at all. Like every time I think of traveling, there's something that happens that sort of like ruins it. Even though I love traveling, probably in my future life, I'll make a lot of content revolving around that. But that is something that I haven't done in the past couple of years. It's like been more than 6-7 years since I haven't been on a vacation or something like that. Also, another thing to kind of like note down is the fact that being ambitious makes you lonely. Because I had such ambitious goals ever since I was a kid. Like people have sort of like really lost their ambitiousness. Like think about it for a second. So when I sort of like reflect back on my childhood, I was the kind of kid who was ambitious all these years. Now that I look back at my friends who were really ambitious back in the day as a part of like, let's say their teenage years or even as like childish ambitiousness, let's say, those guys had huge dreams, huge plans for themselves. But as sort of like time faded away, this whole timeline went from left to right and it's still going in this particular direction. Their ambitiousness has just gone away. Like they're not the same person. Like I feel I'm one of the only few who is still ambitious. Like think about it for a second. When you're 13, 14, when you are in your 8th standard, 9th standard, you're sort of like entering your teenage years. You think, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like, you know, sort of like dreams you have, cars I want to have, houses I want to have, blah, blah, blah. You sort of like think about yourself being this particular person. But as sort of like time goes by, you are introduced more and more to reality. You explore life and then you figure out, hey, all these things don't necessarily imply in the real world. Maybe half of those things really maybe work. Only 50% of those things can work. And then you sort of like adjust your ambitions. Then you sit in this spot where you think to yourself like, hey, that's real. That's what I can achieve. And that's really what's ambitious. That's stuff that would never work. As a result of exploring that reality, I've sort of like realized that, of course, there are things that I don't really want to work upon at the moment in my life, but I'm still fairly ambitious. A lot of people around me are not ambitious at all. They're maybe distracted by some, you know, stuff happens, life goes on, their dreams just faded away. And that's kind of like the situation of most of society at the moment. Also, I would like to say that even at the end of all of my teenage years, I worked hard and did a lot of things, but I was still sort of like disappointed with my decisions that I made. I still felt weird about all of those things. And as a result of making all of those decisions, I was sitting in this like really weird spot when I was 16, 17, where I had ruined my mental health completely by the decisions that I had made in life, which by the way, like 16, 17, beginning from that particular point of time, those are your most productive years where you can be most efficient and achieve whatever you wish to. That's the time when you begin to take your career more and more seriously. Of course, you know, you can be anything that you want to. Age is just a number. People say it all the time. But those years really make a lot of difference. Those years are really impactful towards your career. So why all of this happened? You know, end of the day, you sort of like have to analyze why all the things happen to you. You know, you sort of like have to sit in this spot where you figure out why these things happen. You can't just necessarily blame your luck and try to be that foolish little kid who thinks to himself that I'm innocent and proves to the world that I'm innocent and all of this happened because the world is this way. You know, You can't do that. So the thing is, don't just work hard. Working hard alone doesn't get you anywhere in life at all. As one of my favorite speakers in the world of self-help, which goes by the name of Jim Rohn, he often remarked that failure is not a single cataclysmic event. It is rather a much complicated and complex problem than you think. In my personal understanding, I think that it's part of a huge chain of events that happen one after the other. You make a mistake, you repeat your mistakes, keep repeating your mistakes, and as a result of all of those things, you end up in a spot where you think to yourself that, hey, maybe I'm a failure. Maybe I've failed at all of these things in my life. And sort of like the opposite of that is success. You do a good thing, that's repeated by another positive thing, that's repeated by another positive thing. And the sum of that ends up you being successful. That's kind of like how the world works. At least that's my understanding of it. So sort of like another suitable explanation for this is the fact that maybe at a particular point in my life, I had let enter a lot of the society into my brain. Naval Ravikant has often talked about how if you let too much society in your brain, it will sort of like hollow you from the inside. It will destroy you in every single aspect of life. He remarks, it will leave you broke financially, psychologically, philosophically, spiritually, and in almost every other aspect of life. So kind of like I'm sitting in this spot in my life where my particular area of interest lies very different as compared to the society. And that is what I'm going to make sure that I do with all seriousness in my 20s. That my ideas don't necessarily align with what the society has to say, because I had spent a serious portion of my life listening to society and that had ruined my life. So for the next couple of years, let's try not listening to society and let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. I mean, I don't know. So the next two things that I'll talk about are sort of like the ones that I can blame. The reason why everything in my life happened. And that is that I was not raised in a rich family. Like my parents never had that kind of fuck you money that people imagine to have. And also I live in a developing country, or in terms of economics is called as a third world country. But the weird part about these two things is the fact that these two things are out of my control. There were things that I was born with. There are things that I cannot necessarily change. Of course I can change my country in later phases of life, but with family and stuff, I cannot do that. I was certainly born with those things. And the thing is, and this is sort of like the core philosophy of Stoicism, by the way, which comes from the philosopher Epictetus, by the way, in case you're interested. Epictetus often talked about how things are in your control and there's certain things that are out of your control. And you sort of like sit in this weird spot where you have to figure out that these things are out of my control and these things are in my control. And you sort of like have to shift your focus from over there to over here. And that is his core philosophy. That is so important in life. A lot of people, including me, often make this mistake that we spend a lot of our time thinking about the things that do not really matter. I mean, I cannot control these things. You can write a list of those things that you cannot control and then make another list of things that you can control. And then figure out that, hey, I sit in this spot, I can control these things and I cannot control these things. And then take the necessary course of action. Another reason why all of this happened was I had a lot of expectations from myself. And just to sort of like spice things a little bit up on top of that, I didn't just have a lot of expectations from myself, I also wanted things to happen fast. I think at a core level, that's a big problem. Tony Robbins writes the same thing in his books as well. When he was, I think 17 or 18 years old, he went to Jim Rohn and talked about, I want to do this, I want to do that. And back in the day, he was just a janitor making a couple of dollars. I think he was on minimum wage, I suppose, back in the day. And Jim Rohn told him clear cut, like straight up, no bullshit. He told him the same thing. Your main problem is not the fact that you have such circumstances, you're a janitor, you have this happening in your life. But the main problem is that you want too many things and you want too many things to happen really fast. That's the main problem. And I have said this thing at least 1,000 times in my videos. If you have been watching me, by the way, or even if you know me in real life, that things take a long time to happen. Things do not happen instantly at all. If you expect instant results in life, you're most likely to be disappointed because things in real life take much longer than that. Take the example of anybody who's like, let's say, rich in real life. Maybe that's doctors, maybe that's lawyers, maybe that's working professionals of any sort. When do doctors get rich? When they are in their 35-40 kind of range. When they're in their 40s, they have to go through medical school, they have to go through all of that stuff, and then they start making that kind of money that we look at them for. Look at lawyers. Lawyers also have to go through law school. Even me, in my field, engineering, I have to do my bachelor's. That's 4 years degree. I'm just only through with 2 years at the moment. I'm in my third year. Then I have to work for a corporation. If I'm not doing masters, let's say, if I do masters, 2 years on top of that, then I have to work at a corporation for 10 to 15 years. Then I'll become a good manager at this big software firm. But that will take a long time. Nobody is gonna hand me a check that says like, hey, you're gonna make $250,000 right off the bat. Of course, that can happen for a lot of people. That's like a small minority. That doesn't necessarily employ for the masses. That would never happen for the masses. Things take a long time to happen. Just for context, the average age, yes, you heard it right. The average age of a millionaire in the United States, there's about 20 million millionaires in the United States. That's roughly like 5% of their population. The average age of those millionaires is 61. That's not 23. That's not 27. It's 61. Do you want to be that guy who's 61 and has $1 million, you want to work all those years and then be a millionaire? I think most people would say no. And that's part of the reason why they don't have that kind of money, because it's a long-term game. It really takes a long time to be sitting in that position where you have that kind of money. So let's kind of like get to the constructive part of the video and conclude everything now. Number one, don't take life too seriously. One of the things that I like so much about philosopher Confucius, and why I think he is probably without a doubt one of the wisest men to exist in the past. Confucius had this like really remarkable saying where he said something like, every man has two lives and the second one starts when he realizes he only has one. The point of realization where you realize that, hey, I'm gonna fucking die someday. That's the point when you realize that there's so many things, there's so many experiences that I have to live for. I just don't have to be working. Of course, working is a crucial part of life and everybody should work. Irrespective of how much money you have, at least do the bare minimum job. There's so much more to life. There's just so much more to life to experience, to explore than just doing that. Second, realize that you can only experience things once. Don't just let go things so easily. Think to yourself that the day that you're currently living, it's never gonna come back. When the day ends, the day ends. Even if it's a bad day, even if your experiences are bad, it's terrible, it's horrific, still, you only get to live them once. There's nothing really to complain about. Again, coming back to Stoicism, one of the philosophers, he was actually a poet back in the days. He went by the name of Heraclitus, Heraclitus. I think I pronounced the name of the gentleman right. You can Google him up. He said something like, every man steps in the same river once. For the man, it's not the same river, and for the river, it's not the same man. You get to experience things only once. You know, you can say, I've stepped in the river twice, but it's not the same water, it's not the same feeling, it's not the same day. That experience is just gone. So try to experience things with more intentionality. So jumping on to the third thing, spend some time alone. When you sort of like begin with a particular project, when you take like, hey, that's my objective, that's my goal for the next 90 days, that's my goal for, let's say, the next year or so, maybe that's a 5-year goal. You begin to work in this like endless loop. When you take this like one activity, then another, one on top of that, you just keep stacking them, and you sit in this spot where you have like endless work to do, and you're not really sort of like spending time reflecting back on those things. And I was watching one of Ryan Serhant's interview, and Ryan Serhant, by the way, is I think the biggest real estate agent in all of states. For New York City, I'm 100% sure that he is one of the biggest real estate agents of all time. When Ryan Serhant was asked what was that one thing he can go back and improve in his life, the thing that he said was, I want to improve the systems more. I want to improve this game that I'm playing more. You know, systematically look at things. Maybe that's like once a week, taking once a week a day off or a couple of hours off, and sort of like reflecting back on the things that can be genuinely improved. For you at a personal level, maybe that's in the form of working out, maybe that's in the form of meditation, maybe that's in the form of reading a couple of these books that are lying on your desk, maybe that's journaling, maybe that's like picking up a notebook and writing down the stuff that you have to do, kind of like reflecting back on your life and trying your best to improve this particular system. And at last, I would like to say, just live freely by yourself, because end of the day, you will realize that you're a prisoner of your own thought. As one of my favorite philosophers, and he is marked as one of the wisest men in all of Western world, and you know, the Western school of thought, let's call it that way. His name went by Seneca. He was an elite statesman back in the day, and in his book Letters of a Stoic, which is basically a collective documentation of all his thoughts, all his writings, the stuff that he said back in the day, he remarks something like, the worst form of slavery is the one that's self-imposed. After a particular point in your life, you will realize that, hey, maybe I'm free in life, but I'm still a prisoner of my own thought. The things that I'm doing every day, it's because of the way I think. Maybe my desire to improve things is maybe the biggest reason of my unhappiness. And the thing he sort of like remarked further sort of like blows my mind even beyond that. He says something like, men suffer more in imagination than they do in reality. Most things in your life are not worth the time that you're spending on them. After a particular point or the other, you will just realize that I'm just a prisoner of my own thought. Most of the things, most of my problems don't even exist in reality. They're just right there inside of my head. So I think this is a good point to end this particular video. So if you made it this far, make sure you guys like the video. Give this video a thumbs up. That tells me that you're full of energy. And if this is your first time on this channel, my name is Deergh Kataria. I'm a computer science student by profession. On the side, I make YouTube videos, and kind of like the core theme of this channel is that I teach people how to optimize their life, how to make them better, which may be in the form of video essays like this one, or maybe in the form of when I teach Notion, Obsidian, all these productivity tools, a bunch of stuff, talk about philosophy, review books, you know, a variety of topics. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you consider subscribing. I guess that's it from my side. So I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye-bye. Peace.